Welcome to Minerva Meets. I'm your host, Sonal Chandler. I'm so excited because this is my very first episode. And with me today, I have a very special guest who I also consider a friend, Paul Varnedoe. Paul is Customer Solutions Manager at Amazon Web Services. Welcome to the show, Paul. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hi, Sono. I'm glad to be here, and I'm really excited to be your first guest. I can't wait to see what future episodes you've got, and I'm really excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you. So today's episode is about the future of work. And I thought that it would be a great topic to launch the podcast with because it's a topic that really matters to everyone. Whether you're looking for a job or you run a company, I think it's important to understand the impact that technology is having on how we work, where we work, and the tools that we use to help us work smarter. And I thought that you would be a great first guest to have. And maybe we could just dive right into it.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that is very relevant for everybody, regardless of the age or, where you are in your career. I think that staying up to date with, what's going on with future technologies that are happening now. And there's lots that I think will resonate for your audience. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. I've been really watching a lot of the technology trends, and what I've noticed is that as technology continues to advance, there's different trends and challenges that we're seeing, but there's a few that I really wanted to focus on, which I consider some of the more pressing ones. Things like Gen AI, remote and hybrid work, and the collaboration tools that we leverage during those remote times. And, how are we leveraging those tools to make our work more successful? I also wanted to touch on the skills that we need to what I consider staying relevant in today's world, especially with AI. And there's this fear that AI is going to take everyone's job. And obviously with all of this, the whole concept of finding work-life balance in this digital age.
Yeah, it's definitely scary for a lot of folks that aren't, used to this, and you feel like you've got Big Brother watching you, or that, if feel like you haven't learn some of these skills, that you're going to be pushed out of jobs or opportunities. So I think in the job market, there's lots of things that are being done to leverage technology. You mentioned Gen AI, so AI and automation, they're increasingly being used in the workplace to handle repetitive tasks or data analysis, or even some decision making processes. There's ChatGPT is the big one that we've all heard, which kind of exploded on the scene a year ago, and people playing around with it a little bit. And it may have started in a college to write a term paper, and then it's exploded into the workplace. And some areas it's been very useful, but there's also a lot of danger, if you want to call it that, with either the accuracy of it or the biasness that comes through. There are hallucination effects where you can almost lead the witness a little bit to create the output that you want. But knowing all of those, I think that these new tools are really amazing in terms of how you're able to be more productive and really focus on what your strengths are. I know that there are some jobs where you've got repetitive tasks, and if you can manage that, if you're a realtor and you want to be able to post listings, you can read some things into these tools and have it spit out a listing that's would just take you time, but you can actually do that in your car coming from a site back to your office. So there's lots of ways that you can adapt that. But technology is not just about how you're working, but it's also where you're working.
Right.
COVID-19, we talked about this. You had to learn how to work remotely. Not only from an individual, but also from the companies. They had to adjust and adapt to the technology. And so it really jump-started a lot of how we can be a little bit more distributed in our workforce. So there's lots of return to office mandates that are going on with some companies now. But even if you're in the office, you're still using these tools. So knowing how to use them the best way is really good. One of the other things. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to go back to the automation piece. So, you talk about leveraging ChatGPT. I actually have embraced it fully to help me with a lot of the research that I do for things like this podcast or other writing that I do. And I was wondering if you had some examples that maybe you've used or you've seen other colleagues at Amazon using automation to sort of help make their work more efficient.
I have, yes. I mean, playing around with ChatGPT was pretty easy because the bar was low. You just signed up quickly. It was for free. And then you just started throwing stuff in there like, write me a sad country song about rain, and it could spit something out, in 10 seconds. It was kind of fun to play around with that. Amazon and Amazon Web Services have really upped the game a lot in the last year. So there are things that we're doing in our company to help corporations, specifically around developers, get more effective. So we've got a tool called Cloud Whisperer that you can feed in a lot of your code base in a secure environment, whereas ChatGPT is open. Whatever you type in, whatever I type in, that could be an output that is being used for other folks. So the security is not quite there. And for companies that want to make sure that their intellectual property, that's a whole separate topic we probably won't cover today because neither of us are lawyers, but there's some danger in that. So what Code Whisperer does is it looks within the confines of a organization, and it's protected and secure. And then you can actually use that to create lines of code or objects of code that can help with new training for new employees or standardization around that. So that's some of the things that we're seeing with some of our customers. And then Amazon Q has been another one that's been kind of a competitor to ChatGPT. So I've seen that starting to get used more and more.
Very cool. I mean, soon enough, I'll be able to be a developer with this.
Yeah, and the concept has been around a while, but it's low code, no code. So, folks like us, if we've never taken a Python class, or that's not our, 9 to 5 job, we can still create scripts and be able to do things through automation that maybe we weren't able to do 10 years ago without some serious training.
Right. Well, let's talk about, you also touched about how the pandemic sort of created this push to the remote revolution is what I'm calling it. And, a lot of companies, especially the big players like Google, Facebook, they were sort of plug and play and ready to go once the pandemic hit. But there were, other companies that were sort of trying to catch up. And some of the tools that really kind of started exploding were things like Zoom, Slack. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the experience that you have with those tools and how they've impacted the remote work model?
Yeah, it definitely enabled things quickly. Zoom sort of came out of the gate. They've been around a while, but I think it was, there are companies like Microsoft and Amazon that have their own tools like Teams and Chime, and you typically need to have an account set up with them. Google's the same way. You've got Google Chat. But Zoom, you could just create, an account without, very little overhead. You're not going to get bombarded with sales or have to, weed through a bunch of steps to get it set up. So I know, like, we would stay in touch with our family, through Zoom, and it was easy for, kids or retired folks that really didn't have a workplace to go to. But within confines of work, it depended on what your company was using as a tool. Microsoft Teams became really big. Chime for Amazon became really big, and I still use Zoom and WebEx and other video tools to really help. So the tools were there, but I think the mindset had to come around. There are folks. I'm an introvert, by by birth. My wife is not. So the type of energy we get from our surroundings is very different. And I think for extroverts, it became really tough to sort of get motivated or to look into a video screen and really build that energy that's needed to do some of your jobs. And I know too, like, I started a week before COVID at Amazon. And so the typical networking that would go on around meeting your coworkers and doing training and having that, kind of freshman class, if you will, you had to be really intentional about networking. You had to just ping somebody randomly and say, hey, I'm Paul, just started a month ago. This is what I'm working on, or we're in this training class together. We'd love to hear more about you. There was, good thing there were tools like LinkedIn where you could go and do some research and see, like, oh, this person used to work at the same company I did, or whatever. So the networking aspect of it became a little bit different.
Yeah, and then, sorry, just to chime in here a little. There's also, I think, the challenge of creating a culture, right, that some of these organizations are facing we're facing, and probably still today around, how do you create an inclusive culture where you can do some of that networking with other folks within the organization when everybody is remote. And I think some of that is also creating that mandate for people to come back to work.
Yeah, you mentioned Slack, and that's something that our company uses pretty extensively. And it's a neat tool. Not that it's the only tool that does this, but it does a really good job of creating communities in there. So you can have, if you and I are working on a project, it can be private, but you can also have a public group that anybody can join to talk about either relevant work topics or even outside of work. So, if you're talking about, any sort of social interaction, or I mean, I've seen like Taylor Swift fans, I mean, any place that you can go and just talk about a topic, photography or, sports or automotive, whatever it is, there's a way that you can create that virtual community to sort of replicate some of that, going to a baseball game and, cheering something on with your fans. You can sort of build that, but you're right. It does not replace the face to face. And I think now we're starting to see, like, how do we bridge that with going back into the office with still leveraging these tools? And not really a right or wrong answer, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And, a lot of my background is with program and project execution, and, tools like Asana, Trello, or even Basecamp or Jira is the other big one.
Mm-hmm.
Are definitely something that I think have helped kind of keep us all organized, prioritizing work and things like that. So, I'm sure there's several users out there of each of those tools, but I just find some of those to be extremely helpful and sort of focusing in on the work that needs to get done. And then there's also the document sharing, right? Like how do you share documents? And there's so many different options out there. I think some people use Google Workspace, and then obviously Microsoft has its own suite of products in that space as well. Do you have a favorite that you like to gravitate towards?
Yeah, I think the key is collaboration. Those tools really help to bring a team together, whether it's like you mentioned, the project management space where you've got Asana or Jira, you've got these boards that you can kind of see quickly and self-serve information about where things are and provide input where it's needed. At Amazon, we use Work Docs as kind of our, equivalent of, say, like what a Dropbox would be. So you're able to store various Office docs, PDF docs, any sort of files that you can share and limit, the security within others. And then there's some other collaboration tools that we use as well. I mean, we've got Salesforce. We're a big user of that. So there's tracking and ways that you can do things in there. And Quip is another where it's almost like a Google Docs or a G Suite, where you've got access to come into a document or a spreadsheet and multiple people can edit in there. So it's really like where we are, we're almost tool agnostic, because I also work with customers. And so even though we have tools within Amazon that we use, pretty consistently internally, we may have to go to a customer site and they may be a Microsoft shop or they may be a Google shop. And then you've got to be able to work within their world with their tools. So having that flexibility is pretty critical.
Yeah. And, the nice thing about a lot of these tools being up in the cloud, or you can go anywhere and access them, right? Like you can collaborate with somebody in Asia, if you needed to. And in terms of sort of that flexibility with work, you can also have, I think it's called like the 24/7 work, where, I can work on a document, get it to a certain point, and then, my night comes and then somebody picks it up in Asia in a different time zone, and they continue on that document or whatever that task is. And in the morning I get up and I, pick up where they left off. So I think that that's really cool to be able to sort of just collaborate in that manner as well.
Yeah, the work can kind of follow the sun. So
Yes,
it's never
that's
really,
it. Thank you.
really stops. And even in the development world, it's like that too, where you may start, in our time zone, planning or putting together a feature or a user story. And then as we end our day here, it may go offshore and they can pick it up and start developing based on requirements that are done or however that user story is done. It may iterate through the course of a sprint, and it may do testing and, edits and going through all of the steps needed to get to production. So yeah, it's really great that these tools enable, a global collaboration, and it's
Yeah.
certainly beneficial for customers and, for individuals too. It's really kind of neat to learn about other cultures and to kind of expand your horizons other than just, who you see in your office or in your home office.
Absolutely. So that actually kind of is a good segue into one of the next topics that I wanted to touch on, which is really the skills that we need to be successful in this technology future, if you will. Um, so let's talk about, what are your thoughts on some of the in-demand skills that you've seen out there?
Yeah, there's a lot. And I think that some are always, timeless, right? Communication skills,
Yeah.
they've always been important. But I think you've got to be, you know, kind of updating them in a different way now. Written skills are probably more important than they used to be. We just touched on, passing along information through different time zones, different cultures, and different, native languages. And so you got to be very clear. Just we were talking about developing something. If I don't write my requirements exactly how I want, you may waste a day because something could get built based on I missed one or two key words or a translation. So communication skills are really, really important for a number of areas. Digital literacy, you have to be comfortable using some of these new tools and technologies. And it's okay to not know. It's more important to be curious, and the curiosity will drive creativity and innovation. But you can learn some of these things, and the hardest part is sometimes just getting started. There's plenty of YouTube has made an expert between YouTube and Wikipedia. We're experts in everything now, right?
Yeah.
I can replace the brake lines in my car, or learn how to play guitar. It's just
Yeah, absolutely.
it's pretty amazing. But having that that innate interest and curiosity around learning, and then I think just being flexible and adaptable. I think that you've got to be able to understand where you're gapped, and being able to find how do you get new skills, and understanding maybe where the business landscape is going so that you can adapt your career or your current job or what you're trying to do for a customer, because sometimes your customers are kind of stuck in the mud a little bit, and you want to be able to help them get to be more productive and more innovative, and encourage their employees at your customer site to have better careers and more fulfilling.
Sure. Yeah, I was recently at a session that talked about AI, and an individual actually raised their hand and asked a question because they actually had a student that was ready for college, and also another that was graduating from college, and there was this big question or this fear that AI was taking all the jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
the response that the speaker gave was that it's not necessarily that AI is taking jobs; it's that AI is taking over the mundane tasks and allowing the future to really extend their capabilities to focus on more strategic or creative roles. And I guess, do you agree with that statement? And sort of, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I answer that, there's one other thing that I left off, which I think is really critical, and it's been a thread through my entire professional life, is networking.
Yeah.
That is such an important component. I've tried to teach my kids. I've learned the hard way. It was a struggle finding my first job coming out of college. And then I realized that, sometimes you can't just apply to a job board and someone's magically going to realize how great Paul is and he should be a great addition to my team. You've got to have advocates, whether you're looking for a job or, your position in a company. If you're getting pulled into a new project, it's, maybe because somebody knew the work that you've done somewhere else. Sometimes it's not always what you know, but it's who you know. And
Mhm.
that really resonates well. So I would say networking is right up there in terms of the skills needed to stay
Yeah.
competitive.
I'm
Yeah.
actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that because that's been something that's always resonated with me. And I think we often try to network when we need it, not when we don't. And it's really important to continue networking at any point in your career. And with technology, there are so many different opportunities and tools to network. So, for example, there's an online networking thing called Lunch Club, where you sign up and you get matched with an individual to basically meet for 30 minutes and just get to know each other. You could even go onto LinkedIn and basically meet as many people as you want. And so, if you are an introvert and, going to a networking event is sort of daunting, there are other alternatives to meet people and, can't express how important it is to continue doing that.
Yeah, and I think that going through COVID, people got out of the habit of going to events, and then you had to be a little more intentional about networking through digital medium. But it is definitely a very important skill to know, and even in like sales, if you're a salesperson, used to be in the old days, work the phones, I mean, just cold call.
Yeah.
You're going to get hung up on 98 times, but one or two times someone's going to say yes. You see like these stockbroker movies or whatever, but people don't want to be sold that way. They want to build a relationship with somebody and know that if I'm going to go into a big deal with you, buying services or goods or whatever, that, we're almost in a partnership and you understand my needs and I understand how you work. And it's not just, hey, the last person that made a phone call says, hey, do you need a cloud provider? Or do you need a digital tool? Here you go. It doesn't work that way. So networking has changed even how business is done with a traditional role like sales.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I just spoke to somebody else who was telling me nobody makes cold calls anymore. And so, because technology has even changed just how we do business, right?
Well, and our phones tell me, like, even while we're doing this interview, that somebody called and it said potential spam. And I'm like, click, nope, not answering it, So we've got tools to be able to prevent that. So even if that was your mode of generating business, it's becoming less and less effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So back to your automation and is it taking away from our ability to do our work? I think that it's change is scary and humans in general don't like to change. I think this is, in what aspect it is a big change and it is a shift. If you are not comfortable with what is happening around you, whether it's at work or whether it's, in school or even in your personal life, it's really hard to feel comfortable with that. And there was, I think that you've got to understand where the risks are with Gen AI and automation in general. It can automate repetitive tasks, but if part of your job is just say answering a phone, your job may change a lot. Or if you are, doing some of those repetitive tasks as your primary job, you might, need to think about what other options you have around adding value to your company. So that's where some of those can be, I think, a little scary.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think that there's always this opportunity to upskill, right? Whether it's through your employer or finding means to do that outside of work. Upskilling is so important and trying to continue to grow
Yes.
is an important skill to have, especially as technology is changing the way we work.
Yeah. There are, there, and, the news feeds, always love sensational types of stories, right? So, Terminator 2 is coming to get, our society, and, you hear, Elon Musk and, some of the other folks that are talking about how dangerous this can be. And there's some validity to that, but I think we're also a long ways off. I think in the when the Jetsons cartoon came out, we all thought we'd have flying cars by like the 1990s, and it really didn't happen either. So I think there are things that I think are, certainly from a government and from a security perspective, there are concerns to think about. But I think, for a, everyday worker, I think there's more opportunity if you're willing to do the research and the learning and try to figure out what skills are needed in your company. So again, it's back to change. Change is hard. You can get comfortable doing what you're doing. And if you've been in the workforce for a long time and you're really good at what you're doing, it can be hard to start over. I've been
Yeah.
through several transformation projects with companies, and it's a tough sell for some folks that have been at that organization for 20 or 30 years, and they're the resident expert, and there may be a hero mentality where they can come in and save the day. But if you can't scale your company and you can't, provide some ways to optimize and add value, then, that's going to be a problem, not only for you, but for your organization.
Absolutely. And, I'll share a personal story where, I was part of an organization that was going through a change. And I think at first wasn't necessarily on board with the change, and
Hmm.
until I really embraced it and got on the bandwagon, it changed the trajectory of my career.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity that I'm so glad that I had. So, change is scary, but to embrace it and sort of learn from it I kind of ended up on the better end of it. So
That's a great story because and I know there's different ways to phrase this, but there's like opportunity or growth is on the other side of fear. And you
right,
can really talk yourself out of doing something that, might be materially different from what you're doing in your job or in your personal life. But on the other side of that, you've pushed through that, you've accomplished something, and it's opened up a new door that maybe you didn't realize that was there. And so it's sometimes hard. I think, it was somebody I just saw the other day that said something like, fear has a shorter shelf life than regret.
yeah,
And it's pretty powerful.
yeah,
It's easy to sort of, again, talk yourself out of doing something new, but are you going to look back 6 months, a year, 5 years from now and regret not doing that? And
mm,
again, with there's been layoffs that's happened in, a lot of organizations, and I've been impacted from that too. And so, even though you may think you're comfortable and something is going to stay the same, it really isn't. So you have to be prepared whether you're making a change or somebody's making it for you. So,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's sort of pivot to one of my favorite topics, because I'm on the constant search for work-life balance, and with technology at the forefront, I struggle because I want to embrace technology to help me with work-life balance, but then at the same time, I want to sort of let go of always being connected. So what are some tips that you might have for, how we can balance and find work-life balance in this technology world of ours?
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's when you go to a restaurant and you'll see like a family and they're all looking at their screens,
Yeah.
the teenagers might be looking at a social media app and the parents might be looking at their work app or Slack or whatever. And so
Hmm.
there's regardless of the age, there is that struggle to put your phone down, to realize that, life away from screens is really needed for us as humans to recharge, to refocus. And sometimes it's okay to be bored. That's where innovation can
Yeah.
happen. So I think that, one, there are companies, and Amazon is one of them, where they really try to promote a work-life balance. Depending on your job, like AWS, our leadership really presents that as something that's important to them. Not every company has that. If you're a frontline worker, say at an airline, you may have to just, pick up and work, second shifts or overtime or whatever it may happen. So there's a struggle with that. But I think you also have to kind of take control of that where you can, and it may ebb
Yeah.
and flow. I know there's certain, one of my daughters works in the fashion industry, and there's times of the year where things are really busy and there is no work-life balance. I mean, it is all on. And so
Hmm.
realizing that there's going to be, less stressful times of the year, and to protect your home life and your personal life, to go and take vacations and don't feel guilty about it. So part of it's just discipline. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. It's the screens are so addictive. It's just amazing that every bit of information and whatever's going on in the world is in the palm of your hand is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but it can be addictive too. And so, you and I've talked kind of offline about just, how do you balance things with your family, and maybe setting up some recurring events, whether it's one-on-one time with each of your children, or it's date night with your spouse, or it's
Hmm.
I'm going to get out in nature and sort of just reconnect with some basics that allow me to come back a little more energized and maybe focused. Or it's, again, going on vacation and deciding I'm only going to look at my phone for 10 minutes each day, and the rest of the day we're going to go and have fun. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, how have you tried to manage that?
So, what I've done is I have actually committed to getting out in nature. And, every day I make it a point to get out in nature, go for a walk, whether it's sitting outside on my deck and listening to the birds, just something to just remind myself of something other than my phone. And
Yeah,
it's really helped me appreciate a lot of other things, that are not technology. What's interesting is our phones, as connected as we are to them, they actually do have restrictions that you can leverage
you're
and
right.
set it up where you can put it on do not disturb, or certain hours that you have some learning time. But as a society, I don't think we really take advantage of those tools that are offered. And I think it's really important to start embracing some of those. And I personally am guilty of not using them, but I've been kind of looking at them, and hopefully, I will soon start putting those into practice.
That's a really great point, because I don't do that either. But we all, I wouldn't say all, but there are many people, myself included, that really thrive on metrics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your health tracker tells you how much sleep you've got and the quality and all that stuff. And you're right, there are apps that you can use for limiting screen time, or how much screen time or social media you've used in a day or a week.
Hmm.
And you can put limits on there and have it alert you to that. So that is a really good idea to
Yeah.
kind of.
And then I think, just from the corporate world, I've noticed that there's a lot of wellness programs that are popping up. I mean, I think wellness programs have always been around, but I think that since the pandemic, with the whole sort of emphasis on mental health and wellness, there's a lot of organizations that are creating more robust wellness programs, which
Mhm.
um, they're offering, access to things like Headspace and things like that. So, having really robust wellness programs are important. I think I spoke to someone recently that was telling me that this post pandemic, it's actually created an entire role of like a wellness officer in their organization that really focuses on the mental health and well-being of their employees, and separate from HR. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and an interesting concept, and I'd love to sort of hear more about that when I speak to them next. But I don't know if
Yeah,
you've heard of anything like that.
that's great. I know that my customer has that same setup where they've got a chief medical officer, and
Oh,
they've really put in programs for mental health and physical health and well-being. You see more companies that have, gyms that are on site, or,
hmm.
providing certain things. Another aspect of it too is, some of this is generational, like baby
Yeah,
boomers, they had more of a traditional work value system where it was, face to face, you got to be in the office. There really wasn't, I don't remember my parents ever talking about work-life balance. It was, we got bills to pay and we got to go to work, and this is how it is, and then Gen X came along, which is where I fit into that. And, we got a little more comfortable with technology, but millennials started to really think about experiences.
yeah,
And, that's where work-life balance kind of came in a little bit more. And then Gen Z and post millennials, I think those digital native groups are starting to think even more about experiences. And, part of that becomes work-life balance. I can't experience surfing if I'm at work at my desk. So, how do I make that work?
yeah.
So yeah, the generational thing can definitely play into that as well.
Absolutely. And I think, simply with remote models and hybrid models, being able to turn it off, because it's very easy to have your computer in the next room and then just, you go look at one email, and then, oh, I can do a few more. And next thing you know, 30 minutes have gone by and you've lost that time with your family. So,
Yes,
sort of creating those boundaries and, sticking to them, I think is key when it comes to work-life balance.
for sure. Yeah, it's easy to get pulled into that rabbit hole, but you've got to really put some boundaries and realize that, you're not going to be at your best if you're just working all the time.
Absolutely. Well, we've touched on quite a few topics today, and I thought maybe I can sum it up by giving our listeners some key takeaways to leave with. First, I think having a growth mindset is really important. I read a quote the other day. I believe it was in a Forbes article that talked about upskilling and embracing new technologies, and it went something like, there's a popular line of thought today that AI won't replace jobs, but people who can use AI will replace people who can't. And that resonated with me. And it kind of goes back to our conversation about skills for the future, right? So really, really looking at AI as an opportunity versus a threat.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think just secondly, I'd probably encourage everyone to embrace automation because it's really reshaping how we look at work, right? And it's allowing us to build more efficiencies in the way that we work and the work that we do to be able to focus on more strategic and creative tasks in our roles. And then I think finally, we've touched on it, the work-life balance, right? This kind of goes hand in hand with the embracing automation because it'll allow us to hopefully reclaim some of the time back by eliminating some of those repetitive tasks and simplifying our daily routines. And, I am also going through this revolution, if you will, where I am trying to embrace as much automation as possible so that, I can spend more time with my children and with my family.
I think you summed it up great. I think those are definitely, a good set of viewpoints to have, growing your mindset, automation. I mean, it doesn't just need to be, within a work level. There's, automations at home with some of the tools that kind of make your life easier, or remember to take out the trash or whatever it is, I mean, there's little things that you can do to make your life easier and focus on the things that you can. And I know some people that aren't as comfortable with technology, that might be a stressor for them. And so I think there's probably ways that they can start to get more exposure to these new technologies that make it a little bit less foreign and overwhelming. But I think just keeping that curiosity and that growth and learning mindset is really critical for it. And the work-life balance, it's always going to be a struggle. Companies will take as much as employees are willing to put in, but that's a short-term mindset. So try to find the long-term. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And if you're not recharging your batteries, or as Stephen Covey would say, sharpening the saw, you're not going to be very good. So
absolutely. Well, finally, if your organization is undergoing or thinking about undergoing a digital transformation and needs help figuring out how to get started, Minerva can help you build a roadmap to get you started. We can help determine what tasks are candidates for automation to free up resources to focus on more strategic activities. We can even guide your organization through these changes. So drop us a line at letstalk@minervaconsultinginc.com. Paul, thank you so much for joining. And if people are interested in learning more about the work that you do, I know that you even have a podcast. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor and privilege to be here today. And I think we talked about some really good points. I do have a couple podcasts, actually. I had started a mentoring podcast called ATL Career Journey, and it's really kind of geared towards the 18 to 25-year-olds. But it's really, even some of my guests have talked about career pivots. So it's really kind of ties into some of the things we talked about today. And then currently I've got one with a coworker of mine at AWS called the Paul and Paul podcast. You can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. And then, on LinkedIn, you can find a lot of my information at Paul Varnedoe is my link, but I think we can include that on the liner notes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening.